Hi, once again I'm Sydney. I am a servant of the Almighty God, and I am the author of Humanity's Inflection Point and my latest book, The Thesis, Life's Logic Module. Whenever I start these, I have to always remember to remind everyone looking at the podcast or hearing about the podcast, to remind that we all exist in the presence of the living God. So that whole concept of omnipresent and everything that this podcast is about, the omnipotence of the Creator. Now, I'm not a big fan, I'm not a big participant in religions, because the whole concept that they reduce the Creator to like a man, I can't really, the Creator of the atom, the forces, these atomic forces and all of this stuff. So I think they tend to kind of muddy the water and cause people to push away, because all these, our attributes are being pushed onto a Creator that is really inconceivable to our minds, right? But the goal of this podcast is to talk about how Darwinism is being repudiated by nature. So one of the big things with Darwinism is that everything that happens, right, this started with this natural selection and the random mutation and all of that stuff. But one of the themes that's consistent, and you will see it if you query any of the AI models which has all the information that we have, because we've loaded it into these AI models, is that none of these processes are based on intelligence. That's the big theme of Darwinism, this random and this natural selection. Nothing is based on intelligence, because if you use intelligence, then it comes down to the same question that I couldn't answer. Where did that intelligence come from? But there is evidence everywhere of that intelligence. And so in this episode, I want to take one example in nature that totally refutes all the Darwinism, all that stuff about lack of intelligence and this random stuff and the natural selection, all of that stuff. The example I want to use is something that's connected to all of us, right? We get our energy from the sun. Maybe not directly, but if you think about it, the sun feeds plankton, it feeds plants, right, through photosynthesis, and then animals may eat those plants, and we eat the animals, and we eat the plants too. So the process that I'm talking about is something that applies to every single one of us. It's pollination, right? Bees go around and they go from flower to flower and they collect the nectar, and they create honey and all that stuff. This is something that we are all familiar with. Well, so I don't have anything. As a matter of fact, I admire Darwin, the tenacity, the ability to focus on something and do all the research. I review a lot of naturalist work, so I admire the dedication and the tenacity and that drive to explore, because that's partly of what you're listening or viewing this podcast. That's part of what we are about. We want to know more. So when it comes to pollination, which, like I said, is something that is relevant to each and every one of us, recent research has found, and you can query this yourself in any of the AI engines, right? This is fact. So I'm not into the dogma of just you should follow. Fact. What they have found is that bees have an electrostatic charge. And flowers, so you would think, right, the bees are the ones that are moving around, right? Bees flutter from flower to flower, they go and they build stuff. The plant literally it's just static, it just stays there, and it may bend in the wind. But in this relationship, this is a symbiotic relationship, and all symbiotic relationship between species is a demonstration of the intelligence that defies Darwinism. I know people are trying now to say, well, mutualism and co-evolution, all this stuff. But any symbiotic relationship between different species is a demonstration of intelligence. In the case of pollination, what we find, or they have discovered, so it's now common knowledge, is that the bees have an electrostatic charge, and the flower, the one that sits there statically and just moves in the wind, that's the one that takes the action. It's the active participant in this relationship. So when the flower has nectar, it creates a charge that is opposite to the bee, so that when the bee is in the neighborhood, when it's close enough, it can detect. So the flower is basically saying, come hither, I got something here for you. And so the bee alights, it takes the nectar. In that relationship, now the plant obviously is like, no, you come here, I'll give you something, but I'll also give you something to carry with you. I'll put some pollen on you, because I need you to go and pollinate another plant with the pollen from this plant, right? That is an intelligent relationship. But that intelligence is demonstrated very starkly by the fact that this plant, which we think of as just sitting there, that's the active participant. That's the one that moderates the electrostatic charge. So if the bee is negative, when it has pollen, the plant, the flower, gets a slight positive charge. And so when the bee is in the neighborhood, it knows, oh, there is pollen. Once the bee consumes the available pollen, the charge disappears. The plant says, I don't have any more. So another bee coming around says, oh, there's nothing there. Think about that. Is that intelligent? This is not some mythical stuff. This is not some dogmatic. This is something that has been discovered. So as we continue, as these great naturalists and researchers go out there, they are discovering what has been there for thousands, maybe millions of years. So this plant is intelligent enough to indicate to the bee that I have something here for you. Come on, alight. Take your fill. Meanwhile, you will do me a favor. You will take some of this pollen. Because you have the opposite charge, the pollen is going to stick to you. And you're going to take it somewhere else, to another plant. This is a process that is essential to actually our livelihoods. Because that is how plants get pollinated, and we get the products of that. We also participate in this relationship because we disperse the seeds, not just in the local community, but maybe across the world. So we all participate. But the relationship, the primary relationship in the pollination between the bee and that flower demonstrates an intelligence that could never ever be something that just randomly, spontaneously, because you see the purpose. Purpose then demonstrates intelligence. So here is another example, and I'll be doing a few others like these, where we see such specific and intrinsic intelligence in these plants and animals that indicates the intelligence had to be specifically designed within both organisms for this relationship. So when you see something like this, it's kind of like, you see a vacuum cleaner designed for a specific purpose. All the appliances that we have are designed for specific purposes. You see the intelligence that's apparent in the design. Similarly, in life. So even though the Darwinism, has all this thing about, it's non-specific and there is no there's huge push into there is no intelligence. This is the product of just this random, spontaneous stuff. But when you look at something like basic as pollination, and the secrets have been there. It's been there. As a matter of fact, one of the things we know, and again in retrospect we can understand, Darwin did his great work, right? He did all this research and he produced this publication in 1859. 10 years later, 1869, in retrospect we can see that information was provided that was revealed to us by Friedrich Miescher. He recognized and isolated what he called nuclein. That we know now is DNA. Now we know DNA, and I say it's reused, just like Dmitri Mendeleev, another chemist, Russian chemist. He, in a dream, in this vision, he got the periodic table of elements. I always say that's responsible for just about everything around us, the clothes we wear, all the equipment around us, because that's when we switch from trying to turn lead into gold into this understanding the relationship, so we can have specific chemical relationships or chemical reactions that basically create, steel and all the compounds around us, silicon, all these things. We understand that because of the understanding of the periodic table. What that periodic table has that's common with what Miescher, Friedrich Miescher discovered the same year, 10 years after Darwin did his publication in 1859, in 1869, nuclein, Friedrich Miescher, we have the periodic table of elements. What that table of elements showed us is that we have the basic components of every element. The protons, the neutrons, the electrons. Those same things are reused everywhere. So every element, and so every molecule has these basic components. Well, now we know DNA is reused in all life forms. And so when I'll upload my, the instrumentation of life theory, you will see this concept of reusability. DNA being reused, the sensory components being reused in every living thing, and the ethes. But this is an example. The focus of this episode is to show that the intelligence that is denied by Darwinism is everywhere. And there are specific examples where the intelligence is so specific between a plant and an animal to create that symbiotic relationship that we have to recognize nature is in fact defying and actually repudiating the concept of this randomness. Okay, so to continue this thing of the demise of Darwinism, here is a very specific example that everyone can use of pollination, where the bees and the plant, which is this stable one, the one that's not moving, that you would think that would be the one that in any kind of relationship it should be more static. It is the one that's the dynamic partner in this relationship. It is the one that's turning on the switch of, I have nectar, come on and enjoy. Meanwhile, you'll do me a favor, just take some of this pollen and take it across to where in your travels. Let's have this relationship that's symbiotic. It benefits you and it benefits the plant. The plant is the active participant. So again, here is an example that we must all get familiar with of nature defying, repudiating Darwinism. Okay, and I will be doing several more of these to show where nature has made it very, very, very plain and very clear to all of us that Darwinism, in spite of the great work of Sir Charles Darwin and all these naturalists, all these researchers, but it's wrong-headed, the concept of this random and everything just is based on this spontaneous happenstance type of stuff. What we see is purpose that indicates the underlying intelligence from a source that's obviously is too great for us to fully comprehend. So once again, I want to thank you for taking the time to reviewing this. Hopefully we all grow and learn from this experience of all these researchers. They've given us great information. Okay, so thank you once again for taking the time for reviewing this, and until the next time, may God continue to bless all of us. Thanks again.